What should we talk about?
Well, I have a question. Because I know that you sort of like science fiction, but I was telling you we saw this movie, The Box, last night. And sort of the theme is, you know, sort of the powers from, you know, some place in the galaxy, outer space, think that people on Earth, you know, are stupid or cruel or blah, blah, blah. You know, and it's... but, so my question is, I mean, that just made me start thinking about outer space and, you know, extraplanetary stuff. My question is our consciousness confined to just Earth? Is it knowable that it's confined to Earth? Or is sort of the universal consciousness, you know, truly universal?
Yeah, it's truly universal. It's knowable that it's not confined to Earth. Earth exists in your consciousness. Your consciousness doesn't exist in Earth. And your consciousness is non-spatial and non-temporal, and this becomes more and more apparent when you begin to become aware of it on subtle levels, say.
Right.
And there's no confinement whatsoever.
Is it harder, though? I mean, you know, because, you know, we say that we really are, you know, trying to verify everything that we notice somehow. How much harder is it to think or verify those types of sort of quote-unquote far out? I mean, really, you know, totally, you know, far out or foreign.
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by verify, and I'm not sure what you mean by far out.
Well,
I mean, everything is far out. You know, there's nothing that isn't far out.
Yeah.
And when you notice when things are, the notion of I mean, you know, just even simplistically, Earth is in the middle of deep space. Earth isn't some, you know, somewhere over here, and space is over here.
Right.
Space is here, and Earth is right in smack in the center of it.
Yeah.
So this is deep space. This is this is galactic consciousness right here. But galactic consciousness is not really galactic because galaxies exist within consciousness. Consciousness is extragalactic.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I meant by evidence is exactly that kind of, you know, thinking or reasoning, or, you know, maybe even think of looking at stars, or you know, the fact that, you know, I'm interested in astrology, you know, and seeing, you know, sensing, you know, certain.
Yeah, but there's meaningfulness in all aspects, in all, you know, let's say levels or modes of consciousness, and this meaningfulness is infinite and open-ended and has no limitation in terms of its subtlety or its grandeur or anything. So, you know, I mean, it's like you look at a plant and there's this incredible energetic resonance that the experience of the plant occurs. Now this is an incredible mystical experience. It's not particularly terrestrial. It's, you know, it's an astounding phenomena that is totally obvious that it occurs if you notice that it's occurring. And all phenomena in consciousness are exactly the same, and none of them have a qualifier that makes them terrestrial or makes them lesser or makes them limited, because you can't find anything limited in consciousness whatsoever. The only limitation you can find is the fantasy of limitation.
Right.
You know, the idea that there's a limit, that there's boundaries drawn or lines or separations, is a fantasy. There's no separations in consciousness. You know, when you see the Andromeda Galaxy, when you look up in the sky and look at the Andromeda Galaxy is in your consciousness. There's no wall or barrier or boundary there whatsoever.
Yeah, I guess what I meant when I said far out, I meant, more. I mean, I would be more likely to notice a plant or ocean wave,
Right.
in that sense,
Right.
and less likely to consider. Although I used to a lot consider, the Andromeda galaxy or Castor or Pollux. Or,
Sure, but you can. You're free to.
Yeah.
It's there. It's there in consciousness just as much as plants or waves or anything else.
yeah,
And it's just a matter of where your karma directs your attention.
yeah,
But wherever you direct your attention, you're going to find fundamentally the same thing, which is this mystery. And just saying that it's a plant or a wave, it doesn't put any limitations on it. And saying that it's a extraterrestrial interstellar event doesn't put any grandeur on it, because it's all the same category of phenomena, i.e. miraculous, inconceivable, off the charts in terms of any parameter whatsoever, as anything actually is. What this is inconceivable. What this is astounding. And to label parts of it terrestrial and parts of it extraterrestrial and parts of it mundane and parts of it special is completely imaginary, because any phenomena whatsoever is, if you see what it actually is bizarre, is inconceivably bizarre, inconceivably amazing. And even if you don't see what it is that you're just not noticing it.
right.
So, I mean, what this is inconceivable. What this is this is the miracle right here. And I don't mean in a metaphorical way. I mean absolutely literally. That this presence is here. I mean, just feel that there's something present. There's presence, right? Call it the presence of the present moment, or the presence of your consciousness, or it doesn't matter what you call it. Abandon all designations and just feel there's something present. Right here, there's something present. Feel it. Feel what this presence is. Let it show you what it is. It's astounding. How can there be anything present? What is it? And this presence is miraculous. This presence is inconceivable. It's astounding. And everything is this presence, and everything is, and that this presence can appear as these astounding aspects and these astounding morphings and mutations and this astounding, ramifications and implications and meaningfulnesses and just variety. It's just, it's all completely inconceivable. And it's right here. Just notice this is really astounding, really astounding. And there's absolutely no way to know what this is, to say what it is, to qualify it, to collapse it down to something, to define it. This is absolutely, inherently unlimited and unlimitable. That's a big statement. I mean that very literally. It's unlimited. This right here is unlimited. There's no edges, there's no boundaries, there's no finiteness that can be found in actuality. So, that's beyond amazing. That's just stupefying, but it's the self-evident fact that's the case. And then within this unlimitedness, within this inconceivability, we classify this and that, and this is a flower and that's a wave and that's a star. But all that is really absurd and trivial, because it's saying, well, this inconceivable infinity is a plant, this inconceivable infinity is a star, this inconceivable infinity is a person. There's no basis for demarcation, because you look at any aspect of it and you find the same thing, this inconceivable open infinity.
Yeah, it's almost like infinity is beyond infinity. Our consciousness is sort of beyond infinity. It's sort of taking in, all the universe and which is supposed to be infinite.
Yeah, consciousness is infinite. The universe is infinite, but the universe doesn't actually exist. The universe is an imputation of consciousness, and consciousness doesn't actually exist. There's only this. Consciousness is just a word for this,
right?
Which, again, it's meaningless to refer to these things in words, because the reality transcends all words and includes all words and is inconceivably beyond all words. So calling it consciousness or calling it potato or calling it, you know, quarks or calling it anything is just absolutely meaningless, because what it is, there's no designations for it, there's no names for it. You know, I mean, the name God is a good one because it's self-evidently meaningless and self-evidently indescribable. So this is God. You know, consciousness, we think we know something about it, but God, it's like, well, yeah, okay, God. You know, what do you do with that?
Or dog.
And that's the value of it, is that you can't grasp it. You can't put a handle on it. You can't get around it, and you can't get around this.
And yet potatoes are very specifically the way they are.
There's no such thing. Potatoes are infinity.
They're infinity, but they have, you know, the markings on a potato. If you look at a good russet, the way those markings are, especially an organic one.
Sure.
I'm telling you.
Well, but that's inherent in the nature of this. It's infinitely differentiated, infinitely specific in all of its differentiations, and yet if you look at any differentiation, you find infinity itself. So the differentiations turn out not to be differentiations. So the whole thing is beyond strange. It's just, you know, it completely demolishes any mode of description or any mode of accurate analysis.
But things have their flavors. Potato flavor, rug flavor.
Yeah, there's flavors. There's all these specificities, but again, you look at what the flavor is, and it turns out not to be something specific. As specific as it is, it then paradoxically is completely not specific, because you can't. You know, you go into it. What's a potato taste like? And then you go into the flavor, and it just opens up into what. You know, and you can't even say a potato, because every bite of potato you ever have tastes different. You know, and they all taste similar but different. And you can't say what it is. I mean, the whole thing just gets surpassingly bizarre when you really look precisely at what is actually there. When you let it collapse down to simplicity, and you're not really present with the actual reality that's there, you can say, oh yeah, it's just like a potato. Potatoes all taste the same, you know, and they're boring, you know, like, who cares? But that's not letting yourself see what the actual experience that we call potato actually is. It's just an infinite field of, you know, infinite open-ended diversification and difference.
Yeah, but with its own potato-ish spin.
That's right, and that's the fascinating factor, that there is this specificity in a context where there is absolute infinity, and that's how it is. But it's not one or the other, and it's not even both. It's just inconceivable.
But if I start munching on the throw rug here, it's going to be a different experience from munching on any old potato.
Yes, it will. And munching on any potato will be a different experience from munching on any other potato. It'll be a different experience from killing yourself by holding your breath.
Yeah.
But none of those things are actually those things. So you have this fact of absolute differentiation and absolute specificity, and the fact that these differentiations and specifics are themselves infinities, i.e. cannot be collapsed down to anything specific. So these specifics aren't actually specific.
Well, I had the experience of imagining that I was going to be dying from asphyxiation from holding my breath recently, and I found that upon reflection, it was really all a head trip.
Of course.
And that that most of what I was aware of was this fear, sort of a mental, emotional thing, whereas the actual shortness of breath and, you know, maybe I was going to black out and die, that was actually taking up a small amount of what was going on.
Of course.
And this big thing that appeared, like a, you know, Ghost of Christmas Past, was this fear and emotional response.
Yeah, the storyline.
The storyline.
The interpretation. But if you went just to the actual experience, it would be nothing. It's, you know,
Yeah.
And if you look closely at the storyline, it turns out to be nothing too. You know, these things take on size, take on solidity to the extent we don't examine them, to the extent we distance ourselves from them and don't question them. When you really look at up close at anything, it dissolves. It's like a mirage. It seems to be there, but the closer you get to it, it's like there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Same with the taste of potatoes. Same with storylines. Same with the experience of blacking out from holding your breath. Same with anything. You know, it seems to be something when you don't really get close with it. The more intimate you get experientially with your experience, the more open-ended it becomes, and literally the more infinite it is seen to be.
Well, I guess one of the things that one could do is to practice during the story, looking into it more.
Yes, exactly. Notice it as a story, you know. And again, you know, you'll probably have more headway at first to start with stories that have less investment in them. Like oh my God, I'm going to die in 5 seconds, a horrible death, might not be a good place to start. But you can start with simple places like, oh, I don't want to go to work tomorrow, or I do want to go to work tomorrow, or anything, you know, where it doesn't seem to be quite so extreme, presumably, or pick something in your experience that doesn't seem to be so extreme and start playing with that. And you can work your way up to the fear of death and those kinds of things, which are typically a little more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you look into anything and it opens up and turns out not to be what you thought it was. And the only way anything can maintain the illusion of being what you thought it was, is if you don't examine it too closely.
Well, now here I'm going to be on my the brink of death, and I'm going to be remembering the time when I was worried about being on the brink of death, holding my breath. That's going to be my last thought. I'm fucked.
Maybe. But you would only be fucked literally if that was the actual state of affairs, but of course it isn't. Because then that's another description. And it's a description imputing to be an accurate description that captures the reality, which completely and utterly fails to capture the reality, because the actual reality of your experience is just, it's like the night sky. It's completely open-ended and multidimensional, and doesn't correlate on a one-to-one basis with your narration.
So when I'm having the actual death experience, and part of me is thinking, oh, this is similar to or different from the way I thought it would be, that'll just be a little piece, and there'll be more.
Yeah, it'll be an infinitesimal little piece, and there'll be infinitely more.
If I'm lucky.
No, it's not a matter of luck. Fact.
Well, there'll be more, but whether I see it or not is the luck.
Well, death looks a lot like the night sky. I expect you'll find. Try and collapse that down to something simple. Of course, life looks a lot like the night sky, too.
I found a description that you used the last time we met, which I'd never heard you say before, to be quite interesting and shake things up quite a bit. When you describe the person as the operating principle. And that it's like experiencing the fact of observing as not something that I do, but just as something happening.
Right.
Has a whole different feel to it. And so then I was shifting back and forth between the way I normally am present with observing, as opposed to this observing principle doing its thing, or in operation. And the observing principle has much more of an expansiveness to it that you were just discussing. And whereas actually the other could just as easily as well.
Of course. Because it's a fantasy, and fantasies themselves are inherently open-ended. It's impossible to have a finite fantasy. It only is finite in its claim to being finite. It's like, I would say, your mind might say, I'm not just open infinite consciousness, I'm a human being in a body. But what's a human being in a body? You look closely and it's like, try and draw a circle around that. Try and specify what that is. Try and make a laundry list out of inclusive laundry list out of exactly what that is. When you really look at what's there, you can't. It's too open-ended. It's too much. It's too inclusive. But this is really an important principle because we encounter it instant by instant, constantly in our being. Is this juxtaposition of specificity, of apparent specificity and apparent infinity. And we typically are trained to have a mechanism of denial or not noticing about the infinity, and we hone in on the apparent specificity. But when you notice either one, they turn out to be the same. The specific turns out to not be actually specific, because the details of things are actually infinite. And the infinite nature of things that we deny, it's not that it's not obvious and perceivable, we're just in the mode of completely denying that it's there and tuning it out of our experience. But we think of it as like, oh, I'm vague, my senses are imperfect, my thought is imperfect, everything out there is really sharp and precise and definite, but it just doesn't look like it because I'm like not seeing well, I'm not thinking good. Maybe seeing is fuzzy, maybe thinking is unclear, maybe that's what it is because that's what reality is, rather than this fuzziness and unclarity being a failure of observation or something that actually is clear. In actual fact, all experiences are fuzzy. All experiences are open-ended. All experiences are like cotton balls. You can't find the exact state of affairs of anything. In the first place, for infinite reasons. But some of the more obvious ones are that it's already changed. Nothing whatsoever stays the same for any time whatsoever. Everything is already different. To be is to be different. So things are changed temporally. Spatially, you can't find the exact boundaries around things. When you look closely, things are fuzzy. Things don't have nice little sharp lines drawn around them. Everything is actually fuzzy. And so this idea of specificity that we simplistically cling to in our way of analyzing our experience turns out not to have a basis in fact. You can't actually find anything that's sharp-edged. You can't actually find anything that's stable and not changing. So everything is, just completely spinning off, and everything is completely not anything in particular, or anywhere in particular, because its edges are fuzzy. And so the actual fact of the fuzziness of our experience turns out to be an accurate observation of its nature. Experience is fuzzy. Experience is unclear. And it's inherent in being that it should be so.
There does seem to be a connection with the body.
There's a connection with everything. There's a connection with the body, there's a connection with the field of light, there's a connection with the earth, there's a connection with the sun, there's a connection with your thoughts, there's a connection. All of these fields of experience are your embodiment, equally. field of vision is your embodiment. The field of sensation is your embodiment. When you say your body, you're talking about your field of sensation, right? Well, sure, your field of sensation is your embodiment. Field of vision is your embodiment. Field of thought is your embodiment. These are all the forms that show up that are the expressions of your consciousness. So they're all equally your embodiment. The point is, it's arbitrary to differentiate between one aspect of your experience and another aspect of experience, and saying, this is my embodiment and this isn't. Like when you dream at night, which part of the dream is your body and which part of your dream isn't? There's a body that appears in your dreaming consciousness. There's a world that appears in your dreaming consciousness. Is the world somehow not you? Is the body that appears somehow you? You seem to be in the body and it seems to move around and you seem to be looking from that point of view. But look at the actual relationship. All of that is circumstantial evidence. It's all just appearing in consciousness and it's all equally you. Or equally not you, if you want to put it that way. But it's all exists in the same dimensionality of objectivity. And likewise, your sensations appear as objectively, your sense of touch appears as objectively as your sense of thought, as objectively as your sense of sight, as objectively as your sense of hearing. Right? So you hear my voice now, it's your embodiment. You see the light in your field of vision, that's your embodiment. You feel the sensation of your butt on the chair, that's your embodiment. So is there a real basis for distinguishing? And if so, what is it?
My experience as opposed to someone else's, but my experience of them, it's like their memory, their embodiment is.
Their embodiment's a fantasy as far as you're concerned. You can talk about the memory of this glass, or the memory of this cup, or the memory of Greg, or the memory of this chair. What's the difference as far as you're concerned? They're all equally fantasies to you. You only experience one memory. That's the only real memory. The rest are just fantasies that are occurring in your consciousness. Look at the empirical facts. The empirical facts are there's only one consciousness and it's yours. Right?
That was differently my experience.
Sure, of course it is. So why go into fantasy?
Okay, because we can't know.
Yeah, you can't know. So stick with what you can know.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Greg may or may not have consciousness, but you know for a fact that you do, right? And so stay with something you can work with rather than going to something that's a fantasy and maybe something there. And so how are you going to work with a fantasy? Except as being a fantasy in your consciousness, you can work with that because that's a reality within your experience.
A big one.
Yeah.
Almost everything that's going on is fantasy. All my memory is just fantasy.
Yeah.
My planning for the future is all just fantasy.
Sure. And even your analysis of what your present experience consists of is all fantasy. This world exists in your imagination. There's no world here. There's a field of experience, you might say. And even calling it a field of experience is imaginary.
Well, there's an interpretive, when I perceive things, I'm interpreting them
right.
ad hoc, and that's the fantasy.
Exactly. This interpretive faculty is essentially fantastic. It's essentially imaginary. And if you could see what's not imaginary, if you could say, maybe it's impossible to stop the imaginary, but if you could kind of just sort of hold, okay, this universe of my experience is imaginary, I'm going to hold over here. What's left? What's the remainder? It's right here. Just look and see what's not imaginary. And the first thing you notice is you can't say anything about it. Because to say something about it, you have to be imagining something about it.
When you comment on the fuzziness of experience, what do you mean by that?
You can't say exactly what anything is.
Does that mean that the experience in the moment?
Because experience is only in the moment.
And so you're equating experience with fantasy, imagination?
No. Fantasy is an arbitrary qualification of aspects of experience. But experience is experience. Fantasy is experience. Sight is experience. Thought is experience. Sense, feeling of touch is experience. All of these things are experience. And they're all fields of fuzziness. None of them have clear, sharp demarcations.
Because my experience, I seem to have, I seem to see cause and effect.
Sure.
But I have to say that there is lots of confusion there too. But it's
Confusion is another way of saying fuzziness.
oh, okay.
Confusion and fuzziness are synonyms. Again, you can't say, you can toss out a possibility, a possible interpretation of, yeah, maybe it's like this, maybe like that, but I'm not really completely sure. And that I'm not really completely sure is a very interesting aspect, because we usually ascribe it to our error. But what I'm saying is, this is actually an inherent aspect of reality itself. Reality isn't sure what it is.
Wow.
And this is evident in its presentation of itself. It's exploring itself, and it's not finding definitive answers.
Well, what is it? What definitive answer is it trying to find?
Well, we can't really know, can we? But theoretically, it's trying to find. I mean, one can imagine or speculate that it's trying to find its own true nature, and it looks around and it finds all of this possible expressions, which include what it is. This is all real, so this is aspects of reality, but you can't go to anything specifically and say, yeah, now I've got it finally. This is the end of the equation. This is the part. This is like the answer. It's all just sort of vague and fuzzy and open-ended and indefinable and maybe this and maybe that. But we're used to thinking of that as a process of our fuzzy thinking or a process of our feeling of our perception. What I'm saying is, look, when I say infinity, this is what I'm referring to: the fact that nothing can be pinned down. Sometimes I describe this by the principle that reality is divergent instead of convergent. If reality was convergent, the closer you look at it, the sharper it would get. The more things would I know Greg a little bit. I've been hanging out with him and I've talked with him and I know a lot about him. But so if reality was convergent, the more time I spent with Greg, the more he'd come into focus, the sharper he'd be. And it's not like that. The more time you spend with someone, the more they open up and turn into, you just reveal more and more different aspects of them, and this no central core comes into any focus at all. And I mean, this is talking about a supposed person, but this applies to any object of experience. You think if reality was convergent, the more the experience you had of that chair, the more you would really, really know what that chair is, and eventually you'd get to the absolute chairness of that chair, and it would be like crystal clear and absolutely like a diamond and adamantine and sharp and delineated and just like cross the T's and dot the I's. But it's not like that, is it? You look at this chair and you look at it you could live with that chair the rest of your life, and you just keep having different angles, different takes on it. You walk out one morning and it looks one way, you walk out another morning and it looks another way, Because the reality of our experience is inherently divergent, not convergent. In other words, the closer you look at something, the more is there, rather than the less is there. In other words, it doesn't hone down to precision, it doesn't hone down to a sharp core. On the contrary, it opens up into into vagueness, into lack of integrity. I.e., another way of putting this is to say integrity is a myth. Nothing has any integrity whatsoever.
So, what happens to the rationalizing faculty? I'm used to using it quite a bit,
Of course.
but it seems that that's not a useful tool in unfoldment.
it's useful to notice its limitations and to discover its limitations, but it's not ultimately useful. In other words, you can't rationalize reality. Reality is inherently irrational.
Well, I mean, I rationalize my apparent experience,
Right.
which is probably not something. I mean, that's what you're talking about, the divergent aspect of
Right.
reality.
Exactly so. So you can rationalize your experience, but ultimately you're going to get to a point where it fails. Mm-hmm. You're going to get to a point where you're going to either say, I don't know, things are, or you're going to notice that things aren't really correlating. I mean, people that have a really tight worldview and a really sharp worldview, and they know what everything is, and they know how it's working, and they've got it down, pretty rapidly they discover that, wait a minute, and the actual train of events is diverging from their version of it. And that implies that their version is not correlating with reality. And any rational version will not correlate with reality, because reality is not graspable by linear means, by logical means, because reality is inherently beyond logic, because it's infinite. Reality is not either or. It's not even both and. It's some whole new kind of logic that it embodies that is completely beyond human mentation. But fortunately, we don't need to capture it by our thought, because here it is. We don't need to capture it. It's right here. All we need to do is let go of thought, use thought for what it's good for our jobs and remembering recipes and addresses and whatever else. But when you want to investigate reality, go to reality itself and let it show you what it is. But if you're approaching it through logic, if you're approaching it through thought, you're going to miss it. You're not going to catch it.
So there's really nothing we need to do except, this is it. This.
Yes, exactly. This is it. And then, and not as a thought, but see what this is. You can see what this is. You can go into this. You can study it, but not by thinking about it, not by analyzing it, not by modeling it, but by going into it, experiencing it, become expert in it, just by, and you swim in it. It's like becoming an expert in swimming. You don't do it by thinking about it. You do it by get in the damn water and just spend some time there, and then you learn what it is. And maybe you can say a lot about swimming after you've become good at it, but the talking is not the swimming.
Yeah.
And likewise with this, talking about this is not it. This is what it is. And so you want to become expert in this, swim in it.
Well, the unfoldment process seems to be very subtle, and it happens in my experience, I don't even know, the openings just kind of happen, and
oh yeah.
I don't know what's happening. It just
All of this talk and all of this reasonableness is just a Trojan horse. There's no point in any of it. It's not like anything important is being said here.
But yet there's something happening.
Yeah, there's something happening.
So what's that?
What is that?
Yes.
That's the point. So this is swimming. This is a swimming lesson. Think of yourself as swimming in subtle energy.
Yeah.
And this is a swimming lesson. Mm-hmm. But it's not what it looks like, because subtle energy isn't what it looks like. It's mysterious, it's magical, it's inconceivable, it's contradictory, it's irrational, it's intentionally deceptive. It like spits off false versions of itself with non-stop. Kind of like the sun, You look at the sun, you don't see the sun because you're busy being bombarded by all this light that it's radiating. And reality is like that. Reality is just shooting off all of these versions of itself, like the sun shooting off light, and it's not it, but it's what you see when you look at it. So you look at it and you look at it and you see you see, your experience, and you see this, and you see your thoughts, and you see your interpretation, you see all these different aspects, but they're not it. They're just the symptoms of it. They're the side effects. They're like the light shooting off from it. But it's right here. We just need to learn to not be dazzled by all of these false mirages that it spits off, this absolutely nonstop. And we spend our whole lives being seduced by these mirages and missing the core point. And of course, you can't talk about the core point because anything you look at, as soon as you look, you're seeing mirages.
Well, I've been having the experience lately of in the satsangs where it'll feel very dreamy.
Yeah.
Like the perception seems dreamy, and there's a sleep-like feeling. I feel like I'm asleep,
Yeah.
and I'm dreaming.
Yeah.
Well, I know I'm not, but it looks very almost aqueous and dreamy and swishy, not real. And what feels more real is that I'm sounders. And interestingly, when I'm asleep, I'm often aware that I'm asleep and sort of lightly asleep and having some kind of activity which is like a dreamlike activity, but I'm sort of aware of it, so it's not really deep sleep, which is sort of a similar kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it feels like the stuff that you're talking about that's going like the sun all the time is the dreamy quality, or that my perception is of what is appearing is sort of dreamy, and that there's sort of a still sleepy place where that's being looked at from.
Yeah, there's something real back there, isn't there? There's something real.
Yeah, I guess it's the real thing. It's kind of a sleepy thing.
Yeah. Well, it's confusing at first because when we discover this deeper part of ourselves, it's very, very, very different. That was 3 varies. It's very, very, very different from all aspects of ourselves we're used to identifying with and we're used to observing. And so there's a disjunction typically where we sort of are like, we bounce back and forth, or they both get really murky because it exists in a whole, it exists outside of space, it exists outside of time, it exists outside of all qualifications in one sense, but in another sense it's realer and more solid and more present than all of this. But it obeys wholly different rules. It obeys wholly different properties and exists in a wholly different dimension than anything we're used to relating to. So it's weird, in short. It's really, really weird.
Yeah.
And this is what we're doing: is we're opening to this aspect of ourselves that we're not used to relating to, and it's very weird. It's very, very weird. And so there's an experience of this weirdness that can show up in all sorts of ways: a dreaminess, or sort of schizophrenia, where things seem to be happening on different levels, or kind of a bouncing back and forth thing. There's all these different kinds of symptoms which are typical.
Yeah, or sort of a narcotic effect. It feels like it wears off slowly. And
or a sense that you're following, but then you're not following. Those kinds of things.
Right. Or I'll get hit suddenly by an insight, or what feels like a realization that's like total, and then gone. Yeah.
Because the part of you that is hearing that, the part of you that satsang is really aimed at, is an alien part of you. It's an inhuman part of you, or I should say an unhuman part of you. It's a part of you that is completely beyond your human incarnation, you might call it. But that part of you hears it and knows that it's here, and that's the part of you that keeps coming to these silly things. But this isn't for humans. This isn't self-improvement. This isn't psychology.
Well, the way it feels, it often feels tiring, like a big heavy workout, and often the sense that my normal life, my regular activities and so forth, don't seem as important, and often I find I can do them with less worry, more efficiently, because I just don't give a shit. It's like, well, I've got to do these things, let's just do them. And
the liberation and spiritual unfoldment can be defined as transferring your sense of identity from a human dimensional false being to the true being you are, which is not human, not inside of space and time, not incarnated, and yet which is doing everything. So, of course, when you transfer to that, then your relationship to your normal human circumstances of your life are just much less relevant, and simultaneously much more efficient, because you're actually being the part of you that's actually doing it all in a way that is not causally coherent in terms of normal human ideas of causation. I mean, we think we're living our lives in a sort of a causal level of like, oh, tomorrow I have to go do something, let me think about this and plan it, and then I get the stuff together, and then I go do it, and then it's done, and I come back, and then it goes on to the next thing. We think of our life in this linear cause and effect way. But in actuality, the true mechanism of our life is like dreaming. The true you is just radiating all this stuff directly, and there's no cause and effect. And so as you transfer your sense of identity to this true you, sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? As you transfer your sense of identity to this true you, then naturally the causality becomes much more efficient, because you're much less identified in all of this pretend, bogus cause and effect, living your life. And also your life doesn't matter so much because you realize you're not actually in it. The appearance of your life is just a symptom of your true being, and you become more and more aware of your true being very directly.
And also aware of how, no matter what the life looks like, it just keeps changing anyway.
Yeah.
So
well,
it's a rat's ass.
Yeah, it becomes self-evident that there's really nothing there. It's not there in the substantial way that you thought it was. And it doesn't work in the substantial way that you thought it did. What it actually is and the way it actually works, you see the actual structure and the actual mechanism from the perspective of your true being. And so all of this is about shifting gears into your true being, and it's completely illogical and completely irrational, and it's a subtle energy event. And so all of this talking and sitting nicely and talking and listening and sitting quietly and all of that is complete smokescreen. It's Trojan horse. Trojan horse is probably the perfect archetype for the spiritual process. Looks like one thing, it's something else entirely.
It's dangerous. Look out. Be very afraid.
It's only dangerous if you want to survive as a human being.
Yeah.
And no one does survive as a human being, so that's a sinking ship right there. You may as well scuttle. Excuse me, Faye. Try break.
What did you do? What did you do?
Oh, that grapefruit and avocado salad.
I'll try him.
With walnut and...
Is that every ingredient?
Just when I thought I was getting this.
That's when I thought I was getting this. Yeah, this is the same. Just went to hyperspace.
It's the same general picture. What's different about this than for everyone else?
How would you know, Frank? You weren't even here tonight.
I never fell asleep. It just seems like
You were.
Just seems like.
It just sounded that
it
way.
never seems to me like I'm asleep. Believe it or not.
Always seems to be like I'm.
The deep samadhi.
Just digesting all that dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't
Jeff?
do that.
Jeff, are you listening out there? Are you taking notes?
We're still alive.
Yeah, of course. The show never ends. We're still on.
Yeah. What did you put on it?
Walnut oil.
Wow, that's what it is. No wonder.
Wow.
Tossed in walnut oil. The walnuts are tossed in walnut
It's got a little balsamic too, eh?
oil.
Uh-huh. Wow.
Is it that magic balsamic that you brought back?
No, we didn't get any.
You did? Why not?
I just gave it away.
Too generous.
Yummy.
We'll resume in a minute if anyone's out there actually watching.
Yeah, guys, the food's really good.
Hold it up to the camera and watch it.
Really irritating. Trojan horse. Did you bring these? What are they?
Persimmon?
Persimmons, huh?
Yeah, Japanese persimmons.
Very nice. Never had one before. It's like, what pepper?
Yeah, they're a great palate cleanser.
Very nice.
And we'll start again. Trojan horses are by their very nature confusing because they look like one thing and you're approaching them as if they're something, but they're something entirely different. It looks like a pretty statue of a horse and it's actually an invading army. Whole different paradigm here, whole different response set. I mean, the whole, different ballgame in every sense of the word.
They really, if they fell for it too.
And that's the definition between, that's the difference between genuine spirituality and pseudo-spirituality. Pseudo-spirituality looks like a pretty horse and that's all it is. Genuine spirituality is an army in there that's going to rape, burn, and pillage.
Yep.
I had this thought the other day as I was wandering around in this strange state of affairs, that there's these various layers of whatever I'm projecting, and it would seem like I could just flip a switch and be on the other side of it and be back a couple of layers. And then I said to myself, well, who the hell's going to flip that switch anyway? And I said, well, I'm already back there anyway. It's me that's back there that's got the switch right in front of it that could flip the thing. It's not like I have to break through any barriers to get there. I'm already there.
Right.
Peter?
Yeah.
Like I've noticed that thinking about how things actually work, I've noticed that things don't really, I mean, if I have an idea that, I want things to work out a certain way or get someplace, it doesn't just work, it doesn't work out like that. I mean, what actually plops out is something there's not a one-to-one relationship about satisfaction. I mean, it's just sort of like a continuing movie that just keeps going out and keeps receding, So sometimes I don't even try to do anything anymore because I don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. Everything always ends up differently than we expect, and it's doing itself anyway. So why sweat the small stuff? Why worry about the details since they don't actually accurately apply anyway?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I can't really trust that something that I do is going to end up the way I want it.
Yeah, the functioning of our life is turns out to be very dreamlike when you look at it, because it takes these weird turns and it's unpredictable and you can't even tell exactly what's happening even while it's happening anyway, because there's just too many factors and you can't pin it down. So I mean, the whole thing is just very very squishy and fluid in reality when you see how it is.
Yeah. The satisfaction element, I mean, you may get some satisfaction out of something, but it may have like 10 other aspects that you didn't even expect.
Yeah.
In fact, it will.
Yeah, when you're looking for satisfaction in circumstances, you're screwed.
Yeah.
That's the engine behind samsara. That's the engine behind frustration. Is that circumstances are unsatisfying inherently because they never end up the way you expect them to, and even when they do, they turn out to be different than you thought they were going to be just by their multidimensionality, constantly changeability, and so on and so forth. So the only true satisfaction comes from the inherent fullness in the background of things. And when you transfer your awareness to the fact that that's what you actually are and that's where you actually exist, then you have real satisfaction that's inalienable and that is constant, because you're not dependent on circumstance. It's just like if you go lucid in a dream, all of a sudden it feels great, because you realize, I'm not dependent on anything in this dream. My satisfaction does not depend on what happens in a dream. And then you can sit back and laugh.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you need it to happen a certain way, because it's just a dream. Who cares?
Right, yeah. Yeah.
You know, and actually the exact same state of affairs exists in this experience.
Yeah.
Our true satisfaction lies in what we are, the fact that we're the dreamer, the fact that we are totally beyond this and independent of it, and nothing hinges on how the plot goes. Nothing hinges on what seems to be happening in this apparent event.
Right.
And when we learn that, that's when we find true satisfaction. That's when we find liberation. As long as we're hanging on events to turn out a certain way, we're screwed. Because even if you lived a perfect life, while you're going to be on your deathbed, and then you're going to lose it all anyway. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
You know, and that's not going to happen. The perfect life isn't going to happen anyway, because circumstances just, they're just crazy.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's like, you all of a sudden realize you don't have a dog in the fight.
Exactly. Yeah. I like this. We got Trojan horses, dogs.
Dog fighting.
Extraterrestrials.
Yeah, extraterrestrial. We got a real barnyard event going on here.
Well, as you were talking about this, I was thinking of Gladstone Gander, who's the character who always knows that his luck is going to come through and that he'll hold out his hand and money will fall into his hand. But it's kind of like that, really. If you don't give a shit what happens, then everything that comes is like money coming into your hand, and you just trust your luck.
Yeah. Because then you get to enjoy what comes instead of being pissed off at it for not being what you wanted.
Yeah.
Because it's all free.
Even the fucked
Tomorrow
up
is free. Tomorrow you don't have to pay for it. It's just going to plop in your lap. Tomorrow it's going to happen. It's free. It's like free money. It's free experience, And when you see that it is free, all of a sudden it's like, yes, it's the gift. It's like, oh yeah, cool. There's this, and you get to play with it. And then there's more. Forever and ever.
Even domestic tribulations, I'm finding, have there's a certain satisfaction even in that.
Yeah. Amazingly.
It's fulsome.
Yeah, it's like a luscious drama.
Very luscious.
Yeah.
Very dramatic.
Very dramatic.
If you want to hear a law of attraction story, I was driving around with my mentally ill friend. She was complaining that she needed some new clothes. And I don't have any money to buy her any clothes. It's ridiculous. So we went to this park that we like to go to, which is kind of like a little garden. And next to it were these two big garbage bags full of clothes that were all new and all fit her. It was like within 2 minutes of when she said that, she had two huge bags of clothes that all fit her. Amazing. I told her next time she should ask for a suitcase full of money.
Suitcase, hell. Boxcar. $1,000 bills. $1,000 bills and bearer bonds.
Bearer bonds went out of style. They're like illegal now.
The latest New Yorker described the amount of money that Bloomberg has as 12 miles high dollar bills.
That's how much Mayor Bloomberg's money would be.
12 miles.
Only one stack up.
Yeah.
Seems like that much.
Well, it also has this long story about the dreadful conditions in the Gaza Strip since the last Israeli war. And I thought to myself, well, why don't we just go there and, do satsang with these people? These children shouldn't be like out bombing each other. They should be like going home to their mothers and having milk and cookie.
At one point you mentioned the way you have often that you just put your thoughts kind of off in a corner
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could remember when you couldn't do that.
Sure, I remember.
And, I don't seem to have a clue as to how to go about doing that.
Okay, the important thing to understand is you're not actually putting your thoughts over in a corner. You're noticing that they are over in a corner. And the trick of it is like this. Find out where you're thinking. Like right now, as you're thinking, find out where you're thinking. It's just like there's a space with the thinking space, and it's there. Now, go to the space where you're seeing. And you'll notice,
It's different.
yeah, with this space, where's the space where you're thinking relative to this space?
Oh, okay.
It's over here somewhere, or wherever. You can't say because it's not actually a spatial orientation. But all of a sudden your thoughts are partial. Now, stay with your field of vision, go to your field of hearing. Now where's your field of thinking? Where are your thoughts happening? It gets littler and littler the more you open up to where the rest of your experience is. And so all you're doing is, you're not actually putting your thoughts aside, you're noticing that they are aside, because your experience is this vast field, and the thought is only one of them. And when you begin to experience the extent of all of these present fields, the field of thought is seen to be relatively small, relatively insignificant.
Well, I thought I had clearly seen how the thought mechanism is pretty insane,
Right, sure.
and yet I find myself there. It's like, whoa, I'm right in the thick of it, and it happened again and again.
Sure, that's okay. Just leave it. And again, you don't need to stop it, and you don't need to push it away. Just notice
where.
Just notice that, see where that space is, and see how many other spaces you have in your experience. And you're just going to find myriad of them. You're going to find mental spaces that are definitely mental spaces that are not thought spaces. And then you'll see, oh, my mentality isn't even my thought space. The thought space is a very small subsection of the mental space. You'll find mental spaces where there's no thought going on, but there's definitely a space there, and there's definitely an event there. And just become aware of these spaces spatially. Become aware of them as fields of experience. They won't all be identical, and they won't all be the same kind of space, so to speak. They'll each have their own kind of dimensionality. But you'll notice that there's myriads of them. That, your experience is a vast field of different dimensions of energy event, and thought is only one of them, and not even the largest. And so again, it's not a putting, it's just a noticing how it actually is. And you can do this anytime in real time because it's the case. Start with something real obvious like your vision. And then, so you see the dimension of your thoughts in, the dimensions of visions in, and you see that they're different. Then stay with both of those, and bring in a third one, go to sound. And then stay with all three of those, bring in touch. And you feel, they're sort of like thought balloons, say. In the cartoons when they draw a little thought, it's kind of like that, Because each space is definitely its own space, but they don't really have the relationship they have with each other is they're doing sort of in different dimensions.
Yeah.
And so you hold them all open in your present and your awareness at the same time, and you can go to smell and bring that in. It's another whole other thought balloon. Bring in taste. Then bring in like real subtle mentation, those sort of spaces, mind spaces that are not thought. And all of a sudden, and then while you're holding all this open, look at the thought space, and it's just this one little segment of the pie. And you can when you hold them all open, you can be in these spaces, and then you can kind of tune into one or the other. But you'll learn you can do it without shutting them down, without getting a tunnel vision. You can hold them all open and just sort of gently accentuate one or the other of them while still holding them all open. And then your thought is there, your sight is there, your hearing's there, and all of these different fields are present in the vast space of your being. And then go outside those fields, and you'll notice you're still there. Even if you don't find anything particular there, you're still there. So all these fields are floating around in you, and you're vast. You're like this. You're like deep space, and these fields are just little TV screens that are floating around in the middle of nowhere for no particular reason. Do you follow that?
Well, yeah, it's so obvious. It never occurred to me to try to do it.
It's
All
ob-
of them.
Yeah, it's really, all this stuff is really obvious because it's just what's already, it's just, that's why I call it noticing, because it's what's already happening. It's just a matter of noticing that that's how it is, and we don't usually notice it, how it is, because we get all caught up in our confusion.
Yeah.
Here's a question about sound. We talked about the universal sound, or the whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And so I've been playing the guitar, and the guitar makes sound by vibrating the body of the guitar, the entire guitar, not just the strings.
Right.
And the voice, the whole body is there to create the vibration, and I'm becoming aware of the extent to which my whole body is involved in creating the sound, not just part of the body, but the whole body.
Yeah.
So then that leads me to this wondering about the universal sound, and what is the body or the guitar for it?
Yeah, what is?
It's probably everything.
Probably is. I mean, when you play guitar, the body of the guitar vibrates, but the air is vibrating too. The whole earth vibrates. It's not like it stops. It's not like the vibration sort of goes this far and then like there's a wall, and after that there's no vibration.
Especially if you've got a bunch of Marshall amps.
And so, you know, and also, and that's just sort of the spatial aspect of sound. You can also look at the amplitude aspect. So a loud sound is loud, and soft sound is soft, and soft sound is soft, and soft sound is. But can you ever get to a point of zero sound? So sound is a constant of the whole field. The whole field is sound. It's not like there's a 0 point and then sound sometimes happens in it. It's all sound. Just like with light. You cannot find a zero light condition. There's always light. It's just a matter of degree. So this is the universal light. Any light is the universal light. Any sound is the universal sound. But that sound exists on every degree from explicit to implicit. And subtly, the more implicit it gets, the more inclusive it gets.
Well, with light, I've found that there's light that doesn't appear to have any source.
Right.
You know, it's not coming from any light source that I can identify, and yet I see light. And with sound, maybe from what you're talking about now, maybe there's this type of sound that doesn't really have a source. It's just the
Sure, look and see, and you close your ears, and you will hear. It's like closing your eyes. Or thoughts, the same thing. You could say, well, thought happens, but is there actually a non-thought state? There's gradations of amplitude, and you get to a point where there's more and more subtle thought, more and more subliminal. But is there ever a zero thought state? And the background, the zero state of all these things is actually a state of absolute fullness. In the same sense that the sleeping consciousness contains all dreams. And then you dream, and one of those dreams is shown up. It could have been another dream. It could have been any of the dreams you could have dreamt, which of course is anything. But it was that particular one. So it's actually, that dream you have is in one sense completely less, infinitely less than the fullness of the consciousness that it comes out of, which contains all the dreams. So that's, in a certain sense, the background consciousness is a universal dream, and then it shows up as a specific dream when you dream. Likewise, the background of the soundscape is the universal sound, and then it shows up as a particular sound as it manifests, the same with light and so on and so forth.
But when it manifests, that's when the vibration comes in.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily vibrating when it's in the unmanifested.
Right. Well, it may or may not be, but again, that gets into the nature of vibration, and vibration, it can be coarse or it can be subtle. And is there an extreme state of zero vibration, or does it just get more and more subtle forever? These are all interesting issues to look at. And then also that the specific actually doesn't depart from the general. So when you have a particular dream, all the other dreams aren't eliminated. The dreams that you're not having are there too. They're just implicit in a subtle way.
Or just like with this dreamy experience we're having right here.
Yes.
it's specific, and yet it's implicit in it is everything that could be that is.
Yes, exactly so. Exactly so. And so when you notice this, you discover that the universal sound is any sound. It's not a particular sound that you need to go to define. Any sound is the universal sound, and no sound is the universal sound. And the same with light, the same with dreams, the same with anything.
So it's hard to find the no light and the no sound.
Right.
I can't find it.
Right. Well, yeah. So that's a koan for you. Explore that. See what's up with that. Find the actual condition of that.
Well, physics has really kind of redefined sound kind of out of existence. We now have this thing called phonon.
Let's not go into theories. Thanks.
So, this is really weird. I mean, because I've done that sort of exercise and seeing thought, in one place and trying to get really, really refined with sound down to it's just like nothing, like God's, but it's still sound. But I'm saying, okay, so I'm talking about that now, and I'm saying I. And when you were talking to Greg, you said, well, you, or to Irma, who's the you or I? I mean, it seems like it's thought that's doing it.
No, thought doesn't do anything.
But it's not, is it? Because it can't be. If
Thought doesn't do anything.
I'm looking at thoughts over here.
Right.
What's the...
So I and you
That's
simply
so weird.
simply refers to what that is. Look and see what that is. What is it that's doing it? What is it that's seeing it? And so you is that. And when you say you're referring to that. Look and see what it is. It's not thought. It's real.
Peter,
Yeah.
what do you mean by the night sky? That death is like the night sky and life is like the night sky?
Infinity with twinkles.
Little gold stars.
So this has to do with the deep depth of it in a way. Is that...
You could say
That's
that.
my sense of the night sky. It just goes
Yeah.
very deep.
Yeah, you could say that. And that's actually our true nature. That's what we are and where we are. And that's what's happening right here too. And that becomes more and more apparent in between conditions. Like when we're falling asleep, that becomes apparent. When we're waking up, that becomes apparent. Because when we're in a particular so-called state of consciousness, we're sort of identified with that state, and we're giving credence to the rules we imagine it has, and we solidify it and make it very real. But in these in-between moments, everything kind of atomizes and breaks up into sparkles, and it loses its coherence and loses its integrity, and then you end up with this sort of infinite space with twinkles.
And dark, though. I mean,
Well, it's dark,
need
but it's
to
also
say
light.
It's dark
It's dark, but it's also light.
with the twinkles.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily visual. It's as it is. I mean, I'm using a visual to say it looks like. I'm using a visual implication or visual, paradigm, but it's not necessarily like that. It's like when you're going to sleep at night, you get to a certain point where the world has disappeared, right? And the bed has disappeared, and your body's disappeared, but you're still kind of there, and things are very atomized, right? They're very disconnected. There's no coherent bodies. There's no one's connecting the dots, right? It's sort of just this sparkles, right?
So did you say in between the kind of, when we put together a scene like this, that's a sort of construction of sort of something, and then
We're connecting the dots. This is still
Right,
just
but-
twinkles, but
that could easily fall apart and become that sky again.
Of course.
Just
because it is. You know, it's like it's like in the night, if you look at the night sky, there's no constellations. There is no Big Dipper. There's just these little dots. But you can look at the night sky and see the Big Dipper. Or you can not see the Big Dipper and just see dots. And nothing's really changed. And likewise, you can look at this and see a world in a room and a bunch of people talking to each other. Or you can experience just twinkles in infinity. And there's not really a difference between those two things. It's two different ways of seeing the same thing.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
The other day at the lunch table, you were mentioning that grace is everywhere.
Yes.
And then grace is the same as luck.
Yes.
But it seems to me, in my experience, that the glimpses of reality or fullness just seem to just happen.
Yes.
And is that grace? Is that luck?
Yes. And the non-glimpses are also grace and luck. A, because they're made of exactly the same thing, and B, because the one leads to the other. Comes with, you might say.
And then the other question I had was, we were just talking about the divine sound, and in my experience, it's not associated with thought or anything in my experience. It's just like I can hear it right now. It's just going.
Yes. Never stops. You know, if you hear that sound, just see where that sound is happening, and you won't need to do any other noticing at all.
See where it's happening?
Sure. See where it's happening. Just go to where it's happening.
I have no idea where it's happening.
Well, but see it. Don't have an idea. See it. Find it by swimming in it. Swim upstream to the source. See what's there. You know, one word we have for the sound behind sound and the light behind light is this word presence. You know, even in a vacuum there's presence. Even in absolute darkness there's presence. Even in absolute silence there's presence. And presence is that pregnancy. Presence is the fullness and the completeness of everything. And right here there's nothing but presence. So you don't need to go to darkness or to silence to find that presence. You can find it right here. Feel how this is here. This is. There's an isness that is immediate and obvious. It's profound. It's not just a simple thing or an accident. It's like, that's the point right there. This present, this isness, the fact of the being of the present moment. Just feel that. Feel what that is. Feel it. Let it show you what it is. Just that simple fact. Bang. This is. You know, presence. Body language doesn't really add anything to it. It gives me something to do.
It's good.
But feel that. Go to that. Feel that. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. That's the That's the mother lode right there.
Doesn't the light, sound, and smell kind of, by the tonality, tend to just be totally distracting? It's like looking at blinking lights all the time and just spacing out.
It's distracting, but it's not actually distracting because it is that which it could be distracting from. So it's in one sense it can be distracting, but in another sense it's a doorway to what it's distracting from. It's a doorway to reality because it doesn't actually. It's like the light of the sun is the sun. So the light of the sun doesn't. In one sense, you could say the light of the sun distracts from the sun, but in another sense, the light of the sun is the sun.
I think that what we've been doing for this last while is this Togyal thing. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
Can you explain what that is again?
Togal is experiencing the primordial energy directly.
Yeah. Yep.
And in Dzogchen, it's usually put as a visual phenomenon. In terms of it's generally started by things such as gazing unbrokenly at an open sky, or they also do some of the other practices they do is a dark retreat. They go into an absolute dark room for an extended period, like weeks. And again, these kinds of practices facilitate noticing that even in blankness there's not blankness. Even in absolute darkness is not darkness. And so you set your subtle senses to have a sensitivity to this presence, to this dynamic, subtle energy that constitutes everything. The twinkles, what I'm calling the twinkles, which are omnipresent and which actually constitute everything.
And this is what you were telling Susan about sound just a minute ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hear that sound that sort of sound that you hear, or that I'm hearing. It seems like it's in sort of like the top of my head, but I can't really say where it is. I mean,
Right.
if I get close to it,
Right, exactly.
where's the top of the head then?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's in its own little.
Yeah. But it leads you, but that's the point, it leads you beyond simple dimensionality. It leads you into the open-endedness of the actual dimensionality. It takes you to the actual space, the Chittakash.
So seeing that is staying on that is a form of noticing.
Absolutely, that's hardcore noticing. Superficial noticing leads to that, and that leads to not needing to do noticing.
Right.
Noticing starts to notice the subtle energy that's present in everything, and then you don't need to bother with the phenomena. You go right to the subtle energy and notice that, and that leads to reality. That leads to true being, and then you don't need to do any noticing at all, because there's nothing but at that point.
Right. It's funny because once you sort of tune into that, then you're tuned into it almost all the time. And
yes, and then it does itself, yeah.
Sometimes it's away, but you're always
Yeah, and it becomes deeper and deeper and deeper until there's nothing but depth. Until it gets to the point that the whole notion deeper becomes absolutely meaningless. And that's the point where anything other than noticing becomes absolutely meaningless. And so, at that point you're in your true being.
Right.
But you're beyond, at that point you're also beyond dimensionality. You exist in your true dimension, which is the dimension that everything exists in.
At the end of the last satsang, you were talking to a few people, came up with a few people about identification.
Uh-huh.
And it was quite a quite a thing, I think, that happened. I listened to that part again of that one, and it felt as if there was that everything, well, that myself, who I usually think of as a three-dimensional object, just kind of lost the third dimension.
Uh-huh.
And now, tonight it feels like everything's at least three-dimensional.
Uh-huh.
But I don't sort of stand out
Uh-huh.
as the only three-dimensional thing. And it was
Right.
sort of like I was the only three-dimensional thing in my world.
Right.
Kind of using stuff and seeing stuff, but as if I was some kind of center of. And then, the center goes away, but then the center just gets very, very big.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't that I am diminished
Right.
exactly, but it's just a whole different set of dimensions
Right. Yes.
That aren't familiar. The relationships aren't so familiar.
Right. Yeah. Well, as we open to what I'm calling subtle energy, we open to those different dimensions that are apparent and that in this phenomena, and so we discover all of these, new dimensions and new dimensionality to things, and as we proceed even farther, all of these different dimensionalities become completely arbitrary. It becomes like a different way to see things, but none of them. It's not like one was truer than the other. It's just, that's there. That's one way to see it. And but absolutely, breaking into multidimensionality is a breakdown of identifying with a particular dimensionality, which is how we, ossify ourselves as a false self, ossify ourselves as an idea of ourselves as an individual being, and all this sort of thing.
So, you use that word a lot, but I never really knew what it meant. Dimensionality.
Oh yeah, good.
Or that, aren't there there's two and then there's three, but really it seems like there's more.
Yeah, there's lots and lots and lots of spaces, and their relationship to each other is very, very interesting and bizarre.
Are those dimensions inside the experience, the apparent experience, or are they outside, or?
They're inside. There's nothing outside.
So even though I have.
Well, let me back up. First of all, there is no apparent experience. Apparent experience is defining something that seems to have limits, and there is no apparent experience. What this actually is can be seen as finite, can be seen as an apparent experience, but in actuality, when you see the open-endedness of this, it's just infinite dimensions, infinite. You can't even, after a while, you can't even say it's experience. And so inside it or outside it, I like the look on your face. Inside it or outside it just becomes very meaningless beyond a certain point. Because there's not really turns out there's not really an inside or an outside. That's just an arbitrary ways of looking at it, which aren't particularly true or untrue. They're just but there's nothing outside of you. Absolutely nothing. And there is no nothing. So you contain all. So all dimensions and all non-dimensions exist within you. And none of them necessarily exist at all.
I wanted to ask another question about reality being self-verifying. So if we experience everything as this, that's the self-verifying aspect of reality. Is there anything more to that?
No.
So in as it were, the apparent experience, there's nothing self-verifying there is in terms of reality.
Certainly, it's self-verifying because it is reality. Reality is self-verifying and is nothing but.
But the finite,
There is no finite.
right. That's why I stopped.
And the claim to be finite exists within reality and is made of reality. This happens to be false. But it's made of reality, or how could it exist? How could it appear? What would it be made of?
Doing something different this evening. Instead of trying to drive energy up into my head, I'm trying to drive it downward into my lower chakras.
Driving without a license.
Doing it, which is a progress to say the least.
This is the point in the Trojan horse where the soldiers have snuck out and are scurrying around through the town wreaking havoc.
You're supposed to run over and open the gate and let the other ones in.
I'm having the experience of the divine sound getting louder and louder, and sort of
Yeah, it can get infinitely loud.
Kind of nice. Kind of loud.
Nice.
Yeah, that was really powerful. That transmission that you gave Susan was really good. That swimming in the divine sound, really, really powerful.
Hmm?
It's making me blotto.
Huh? Yeah, it's one of the absolute most direct yogas. Shabda yoga, sound yoga. You know. And it's very, very easy. You start with gross sounds. Listen to any sound, the wind or ocean or a bell ringing or something, and then follow it to the subtle sound. And eventually, when you find the background sound, then it just gets louder. And it leads you right to the core of things, so to speak. It is the core of things. I mean, it just, one of the simplest yoga.
I've had experiences in the past where it was too disturbing to listen to just listening. The sound of silence sounded like ringing in my ears too loud, and I just couldn't do it. It was too disturbing.
But that's typically when you're listening, when you still have too much investment in a normal human frame of reference, then it's jarring. It feels, it's threatening. It's disorienting. But when you karmically are open enough that you're letting go a little bit of the human perspective, then that's much more seductive. It's a siren song. I mean, that's the whole myth of the siren song is exactly this yoga.
Yeah.
You hear that sound, and you go mad, and you just won't, and that becomes your whole life.
I can feel the resistance and the almost like fear of it coming up, and then I'm sort of letting it go, and it's able to.
And it will also wash. When the tendencies become gentler and gentler and opening, and that sound has enough power to just wash all those, those subtle graspings just away, and then it just carries you away like the outgoing tide.
Mm-hmm. I find I can hear it and still hear specific sounds too.
Yeah.
Like I can see you, and I can also see,
Yeah.
The infinite light field at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we discover, is that the specific and the infinite aren't opposites. They don't cancel each other out. They aren't mutually exclusive. The actual relationship is a very, very strange one, non-linear one that doesn't make any rational sense, but it's observable.
Yeah.
This is the infinite, and yet this is us sitting around in this room chatting. And to see the truth of how that actually is to see reality.
It's sort of like listening to your voice right now. It's like listening to one note in a symphony.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but all the notes are there, so you can do that.
While listening to the symphony.
They don't cancel each other out. Yeah. The full field of infinity is always present, even as it looks like its particulars. And the particulars, again, don't cancel out the full field.
I suppose that this is possible with mental activity as well.
Everything.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, I haven't had that experience.
And again, it's down to your particular bias. For some people, some things will be easier than for other people. Just in terms of your skill set, so to speak, of the energy system that you are. Some things will be more challenging, and some things will be effortless, and so on, and everyone's different.
Mm-hmm. But you've talked about that with mental spaces, I think. Tonight you're talking about various mental spaces, and it's sort of maybe an analogy between hearing a specific sound and the divine sound at once, and having a specific thought, let's say, an awareness of a vaster mental space at the same time.
Yeah.
Is that about it?
Yeah. Well, there's more than that, because there's other mental spaces too that are as different from the thought mental space as the sight space is different from the sound space. We have this one word mental that sort of applies to, up there or whatever, right? But it's very vague. It's an imprecise word because what's actually there is very multidimensional, and it's not as simple as just, the infinite space of thoughts occurring in. There's that infinite space, but there's other infinite space where other more subtle, quasi-mental energies have their reign.
So is this different, say, than sight or sound?
Yeah. Sure.
But I mean different in that it's more complex?
No. Not more complex, just at a different frequency.
Hmm.
I mean, one way of understanding, one way of modeling all these different fields of experience is to think of a spectrum, of a spectrum of vibration. You can think of it as different frequencies or different qualities or whatever, but for some, so the red spectrum is, say, sight, and then then the orange spectrum is sound, and then so each spectrum, they're all parts of the same spectrum, but they have their distinct spatiality and their distinct quality. And so likewise, there's all of these, there's all these differentiations of our experience, which are fundamentally the same thing. They're fundamentally, what I'm calling sparkles. But sight looks very different than sound looks, which looks very different than thought looks, and so on and so forth, and maybe subtle mentation and so on. All different from each other, but on analysis all the same. Different in terms of frequency or qualitatively or whatever.
But maybe it's accurate to say that the mental space where thought takes place is different from the mental spaces where these other subtle form of mentation takes place.
Yes,
as
exactly.
As different from each other, say, as sight and sound.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, there's several different spaces where thought takes place. Thought is a very complex phenomenon, and we say that thought is, we sort of think of thought as one thing, but actually thought is a composite of many different levels of experience. They don't always coexist together.
Can you say more?
Well, thought can be coarser or subtler, or I mean, I'm sure you have experience where you're thinking very specifically, almost like printed words, and other thought that is very sort of rapid and intuitive and non-specific, but very precise too. And so you're using a different dimension of mentation at that point, which has a whole different functionality. And then there's dimensions of meditation which are wholly, which are transhuman, where thought is a superpower, say, and we all have access to that too, and that trickles down. I mean, inspiration and flashes of genius and all that are aspects of that kind of that sort of frequency of thought. And there's always aspects of that in our normal thinking, and so this, again, is sort of this gestalt or composite of different things happening on many levels when we say thought. It's not a simple phenomenon. We're talking about what you asked about. Unintentionally. And so looking at thought, and we're looking at what it's made of, can be a subtle, inquiry, because it is, it might be seen to be a composite or a really, complex or subtle phenomena.
So does that include what we would normally call emotions? It seems like they're kind of something different, and they seem like they kind of dissolve.
Yeah.
At some.
Emotions are like a lower frequency resonance as a response to thought. I think I would characterize, arbitrarily, higher and lower. Arbitrarily characterizing it, thought's a higher frequency phenomena, but then it generates a lower frequency resonance, which is emotion. But emotion is always a shadow of thought.
Right. That's why emotions follow thoughts.
Yeah. Or are anchored to thoughts, or generated by thoughts.
Yeah.
Beliefs may be thoughts that get anchored in a higher frequency, of resonance, and then they show up perhaps at a lower frequency as being thought from time to time, but they're there even when you're not thinking them.
Yeah.
And they can resonate and generate emotions on a lower frequency too, perhaps. I mean, all of this stuff is, to put it like this, is sort of vague at best, but we can explore these for ourselves and see the truth of it in terms of our subtle anatomy, so to speak, or this, the orientation of the energies that are functioning in our experience. But just this idea, like we were talking about, just this idea of looking at these different dimensions of our experiences coexisting simultaneously, and then seeing the cross-correspondence or lack thereof between them, can be a really useful, avenue of inquiry.
Peter, is it important to do all of that?
No, nothing's important.
Okay.
These are all just tricks.
Yeah.
I find like I've got a lot of homework to do.
Sounds exhausting.
I know.
No, nothing's important. Doesn't matter. These are all tricks that if you feel drawn to, you can play with them, or think of them as toys. Your life, your being is like a big playpen, and all of these are different toys that are sitting around in the corner, and you can go over and play with them anytime you feel like, or not.
Don't do it when you're driving. No noticing and no text messaging while you're driving.
But we come to certain points in our unfolding where we're naturally drawn to these kinds of tricks or explorations, and then these different techniques, or so to speak, or whatever, are at that point they become attractive, and we're drawn to them, perhaps. And then maybe we'll move, and then we let go of that, and we're drawn to something else, or that we're under a period where we're not drawn to any of that. All of this is inherent in this bizarre process.
I think this discussion of the spectrum of the various facets of sensation and emotion, and it's just fascinating. I love this idea.
Well, this is what I'm talking about with subtle energy. It's like substantially, what is actually making up our experience? We have the field of vision, we have the field of thought, we have the field of sound. What's actually happening there? What's actually going on? There's some kind of, we might call it energetic phenomena that are appearing within consciousness. But these are all happening immediately, so it's not like they're removed from us, so we can go investigate them directly and see what we can glean, swim in them.
Well, it seems like the default assumption is that we just are our sensations, and that there's no special anything behind it. But then there seems to be this, bigger stage that everything's happening on.
Well, I would say both of those are true. We are our sensations, but that's not a simple statement. It's a subtle statement with vast implications that we can discover by looking, by exploring.
And what ends up happening is that you don't ever get to the bottom of it, because
Right.
you can look at the physical, you can look at the subtle, and you can start saying, well, where did that come from? And you get to the ultra subtle,
Right.
and where the hell did that come from? And it gets just subtler and
Yeah.
subtler.
Right. But that bottomlessness is finding out what it actually is. It's like Zeno's paradox. The fact that you can't get there is finding out what there is. There is that you can't get to, as opposed to a failure to find out. The very nature of infinity is to be all this. And by all this, I mean all this. And all the layers you can't get to, and every blah, blah, blah. So, and discovering that is discovering reality, discovering infinity. Discovering open-endedness, discovering irresolvability, discovering bottomlessness is actually discovering our actual condition, discovering our open-endedness. We are infinite. We don't. It's not like, again, it's not like it's convergence. It's not like converges to an essence or something you can find and say, yeah, now finally I've got it. This is it. It's just the opposite. It's divergent. And once we discover the absoluteness of this divergence, we've found what we are. We are
It
absolute
just stays
divergence.
diverged. It doesn't ever come back again.
Yeah, because there is no back. Back is an imputation that is capable of being generated, but it's a fantasy. There's no integrity. There's no centrality. There's no, the dots aren't connected. It's just infinite twinkles in infinite space.
It's a one-way trip.
Well, it's a no-way trip. That's a good place to turn off the recorder.